In about 3 months time, this card will be 4 years old. Yes, the RTX 3080 will be 4 years old by September. Now, there's a lot of these cards in the used market with really good prices, and you can find a lot of deals with these cards. However, in 2024, do you think that this card, RTX 3080, is still viable for 1440p gaming, especially on our fast-paced shooters? That would be what we're here to find out. We're going to check this card's current performance on our games, and it would be ideal to compare it with a modern card like the 4070, but we don't have that card. What we do have is the 4060, which is Nvidia's entry-level card. And I know it would be unfair to compare a former flagship against a newer entry-level card. But besides looking at current performance of this card, it would also be good to see the gap between that card and this former flagship. Okay, let's go.
For this test, we are using the EVGA RTX 3080 for the Win 3 10GB graphics card, and we are putting this inside our Ryzen 5800 X3D rig. Latest drivers were used at the time of recording, and we have repeatedly run our benchmark cycles until we were able to get consistent results before we started recording. Competitive settings, as always, were used on all our games. Let's start off with one of our demanding games, Warzone, and here we have a side-by-side comparison between the native 1080p and 1440p with DLSS turned on our RTX 3080. There isn't much difference between the two apart from 1080p has a slightly higher average FPS, although frame time consistency is very similar here between the two modes. Naturally, we are using more GPU usage and power on our 1440p benchmark, and it's amazing that we're able to push 200 FPS and maintain roughly frame times of 5 milliseconds, which is mostly stable. This is how our RTX 3080 runs against the entry-level 4060. Even with DLSS turned on, the RTX 3080 demolishes the 4060 in this higher resolution. However, on the flip side, the 3080 does use almost 3 times the power of the 4060, and this is consistent throughout all these tests later on. On real-world gameplay, we can see that the 3080 is mostly stable on frame times, with FPS going all the way up to 200. 1% lows is at around 110, but this is actually fine. Even on action scenes, it's pretty good. No surprises or frame time spikes here. Gulag is not a problem as well. For the 3080, it's stable and decent. Frame rates do drop below 200 on scenes where you can see a wider landscape. However, this is overall okay. On this gameplay, we are CPU bound as we are not maxing out our 3080. If we have a much more stronger CPU, we might be able to push more frames on this one. Next game is Helldivers 2. This isn't a competitive game, however, we like this game, hence why it's now on our benchmarking suite. And more importantly, because we're doing our part to spread managed democracy. We are using medium settings here, and this is at 1440p. One is using their built-in upscale renderer at ultra quality, and one is native. Obviously, you are getting better results here with upscaled render. However, the quality here is pretty bad. It's like equivalent to FSR 1. So yeah, we'll definitely stay with native for our tests. How about when we compare this to our RTX 4060? On running shots, it's quite a huge lead. You can see how our 3080 is just pounding the entry-level card. It's running more than 100 FPS with pretty decent lows. The 4060 gets hit really hard on firing scenes, and on our stratagem testing, definitely a significant lead here for the 3080. Although we are using a lot of power here versus the 4060, but that's expected as mentioned previously. On the field, however, here we have a lot of terminated bugs. You can see that we are GPU bound here. We are dropping to less than 100 FPS when there's a lot of things going on in the background. We're also getting micro stutters when we've got that landscape view with the usual bugs just peskering around. VRAM usage is only at 5 gigabytes. This will probably go up if you pump textures higher. Overall, it's not amazing, but it's passable. We're not competing here, but we also expect a higher level of frames when we're playing this game where the TTK, or the time to kill, is quite high. And before we proceed, boys, if you're wanting to see more of these tests and would like to be up to speed with hardware performance on these games, please subscribe to the channel. Let's move on to everyone's favorite building game, Fortnite. As always, we'll be testing different APIs here. Let's start with DX12, which is a much more modern API, and we're comparing the 3080 against the 4060 here. You can see that the 3080 at 1440p is chewing the 4060 by having better average FPS and lows, and this is most likely due to the bandwidth limitation of the 4060 having only 128-bit bus. Now we are not GPU bound here, but the difference is clearly significant. We'll skip DX11 and we'll just go directly to performance mode, which is everyone's favorite API. Now this one's very interesting. We have been running this benchmark run multiple times and we're still getting similar results. Although the RTX 3080 has relatively higher average FPS, it suffers heavily on the lows. You can see how those frame time spikes are happening with the 3080 and thereby affecting the 0.1% and 1% lows, causing those figures to fluctuate very often. Here's all three APIs with the RTX 3080. DX12 is probably the most logical if you want better stability. Performance mode definitely has the worst of the three in terms of lows, and this is because of its persistent frame time spikes. On actual gameplay, this behavior is also consistent. Now, although we are not GPU bound, only using 50% of our GPU, we are getting a lot of frame time spikes with this card. Look at what happens on action scenes like this one. We are getting pretty good FPS, but those frame time spikes can be a real game breaker for this card. Now, to be fair, we are getting random frame time spikes on other cards as well, but this particular one is more frequent and is really annoying. You can definitely play with the 3080, but I think on this current driver I might recommend that you switch to different APIs like DX11 or DX12. Next up is Valorant, and at 1440p this is pretty much an expected result. We are getting really high FPS with our RTX 3080, although it's started a bit slow, but as we go through the benchmark it's pretty clear that the 3080 is a much better card here. On heavy action scenes, here we have the 4060 edging out the 3080 in terms of the lows. As noted in our previous videos, this is an expected behavior. Valorant seems to be more stable on lows when the cards are pushed close to their maximum performance. In game, we're getting very high FPS as well, more than 500 indoors and about 400 FPS outdoors in icebox, and this is at 1440p. Unlike before, we haven't enabled any low metrics here because of Omen's shadow abilities or anything in the buy screen just flicks all those lows. Frame times are mostly stable. Overall, this is a pretty good card for Valorant. No complaints here. You'll be fine with this card at 1440p. Next game is PUBG, and PUBG has different APIs, and as mentioned previously, we're going to test out all three APIs because we haven't done that in a long time. DX11, DX11 Enhanced, and DX12. Judging from this run, DX11 Enhanced is definitely the way to go. Much higher FPS, more stable, and the DX12 is basically much worse, so don't use that. Here we have the RTX 3080 against the 4060 at 1440p, and the 3080 is once again owning the entry-level card. The 4060's limited bandwidth is affecting its performance here and explains why we have a pretty bad 0.1% lows. This is much more pronounced when we go to our mortar benchmark. The RTX 3080 is just very dominant here, it's not even a contest. On real-world gameplay, the 3080 is pretty good. We are getting close to 300 FPS on most occasions, and there are some frame time instability with PUBG, especially as you go through the map with a vehicle, but this is expected. As we go through some of our action scenes here, there are some frame time stutters, but this is generally not bad. We are not maxing out our 3080 here. It's a pretty decent experience. Moving on to Apex Legends. This is one of the DX11 games which I think is well optimized. Let's start once again by comparing both cards, and on static scenes, the 3080 still leads, although the 4060 is not that far behind. When we go to firing benchmarks, it's a pretty huge lead for the RTX 3080. We are capping out our frames here at 1440p with very good lows. Heavy action scenes is mostly the same as well. The stability of the 3080 is much better here compared to our entry level 128-bit bus RTX 4060. How about we go and see how this performs on real world action? We are getting really high FPS once again when we're running around the map. Even with some action scenes here, we're definitely getting that very stable frame touch, and it's pretty good. We are close to maxing out our RTX 3080, and I like this one. That's a really good performer for Apex Legends. There's no complaints here. We can't always max out our frame, but that's okay. This is an amazing card, especially since it's nearly 4 years old and we're still like reaching those really high FPS at 1440p. Now RTX 3080 is definitely a viable 1440p option even in 2024. That's if you're able to get one at a good price on the used market. Now we did a lot of benchmark runs with this card, and if you're interested in that content, we've uploaded all of that at our Patreon. If this video was helpful to you, please hit that like button, and if you want to support us financially so we can purchase and test a 4070, please join us at Patreon. Thank you.